Josh Green here for Seconds Out. Delighted to be joined by Sky Sports commentator and author, Mr. Andy Clarke. How are you doing, Andy?
Yeah, I'm very well, thanks, Josh. How are you?
Yeah, very, very well. Exciting weekend on Sunday, not Saturday, at the O2 Arena. I know you were in attendance on the mic. A real great card from top to bottom, but that main event stole the show, didn't it? Possible fight of the year contender, even this early in the year.
Yeah, and what's been really good about this year so far on the domestic front is we've had some brilliant British title fights. Reece Bellotti had a great win just round the corner at the Indigo in the O2, and then we saw Nathan Heaney against Brad Pauls, and then Fabio Wardley against Frazer Clarke. And I just think it's really important that the British title fights, because it's a massive title, get that kind of attention and that kind of reception, basically, because obviously people are talking about the fact that the biggest fights involving some UK fighters, not all, are going to Saudi Arabia, and we understand why that is, but I don't think that venture has and necessarily will come at the expense of just really good domestic shows, because what British fans like more than anything else, and this is true of any sport, I think, is a good domestic showdown. Obviously in the Premier League you get that every week because they're all based here, but at the same time in boxing, a Brit versus a Brit, a bit of local rivalry, that kind of thing, a little bit of a narrative, a bit of a backstory, and we had all of that with Fabio and Frazer because of the purse bids last year. It just really, really works, and I really, really enjoyed it the whole week. It was great, and being back at the O2, because we haven't been there a lot with Sky since the pandemic, really was tremendous, because there's been so many big nights there. It did well ticket wise. I'm terrible at kind of looking around and estimating how many, but there wasn't that much. There was just a bit of the top tier veiled off, and then pretty much everything else was taken. And it was nice to kind of roll the dice a bit and do it on a Sunday, and for it to work, because it was kind of like a Saturday, because everybody had the day off the next day, which I think is important because people want to go to boxing and have a good time. But everything started just a bit earlier, which meant that the main event was in the ring by about 9:30, 9:45, something like that. By the time the bell went, maybe it was 10 o'clock. But fans have been saying this on Twitter for so long now. You know, why can't we just have the main event at 10 o'clock? And it worked, didn't it? It worked, and hopefully that's something that we can see more of. Logistically, it can be difficult. I understand that, and sometimes everything goes the distance when you don't think it will. But yeah, all round, it was one of those ones where you walked away from it and you were just smiling because you thought that was everything that was good about the sport, really.
Do you think draw the fair result? Because Frazer very much had his moments, and the style of Fabio Wardley will be attractive to others, and it's when it comes to the judging, it's obviously opinion based. So do you think a draw the fair result? And if the rematch is to be there, is that something that you would like to see? I'm sure that's an opinion shared by a lot of people.
Yeah, with the rematch, I definitely would like to see it, but it's one of those ones where if it didn't happen, I wouldn't be absolutely outraged, because it was such a hard fight. It would have taken a lot out of the pair of them. And if either one of them decided, you know what, I think I've got a better option, another direction I want to go in, that's more likely for Fabio than Frazer, not because he's more likely not to fancy a rematch, just because he is British champion. He's already won that title and the Commonwealth title. So it would be easier for him to mentally, I think, to feel, okay, well, I've kind of done that. I had that amazing fight. That was great. That's built my profile, but I want to kick on. You know, you don't have forever in this sport. Do I really need to have another one of them? Which, of course, I think I'll win. But maybe it's better for me just to leave that behind. I would completely understand it if he did that. So yeah, if we didn't see it, I wouldn't be cross. But I definitely would like to see it. In terms of the scoring, it's interesting because I do feel like a draw was pretty fair, actually, because there was the knockdown and then there was the point deduction, and that makes a lot of difference. I didn't think the point deduction was necessarily as vital as people thought, because a lot of people had the point deduction and they also scored that round to Fabio Wardley, or a lot of people I spoke to, whereas I didn't. I thought that Frazer won that round. And with point deductions, they exist purely in isolation. So you just score the round without it, and then you take the point off at the end, basically. And I felt that Frazer won that round. But he will look back on that and he will rue that, because it's just an incredibly annoying thing to have happen. And the referee, Steve Gray indicated, didn't he? That's 3 times I've spoken to you about it now. I didn't really pick up on that, but obviously he would have done, and Frazer didn't complain. And ultimately that is why he lost. When you look at the cards, that it's as simple as that. He'd have won by a majority decision, I think, if he hadn't lost a point, wouldn't he? And after 9 rounds, I think we were talking before they came out for the 10th, and we were saying this is really, really tight, because although Fabio looked like he was running on empty, in every round he was finding something from somewhere. I think I described it as, of these two, you would rather be Frazer Clarke, because he looked fresher. He still looked like he was feeling it, absolutely, but he looked fresher. And going into those last 3 rounds, I felt like he was capable of taking it away from Fabio. But that just shows you the heart that Fabio Wardley, that both of them have got, because he just wouldn't let it happen. Right at the very end as well, where he got hit by that strong right hand and Frazer followed up. That would have put a lot of people down and knocked them out, actually, because your resistance levels at that point must be pretty much on the floor. But he managed to use the ropes and somehow stay on his feet and get through to the end of the fight. So, yeah, I do feel like a draw was fair enough. But as I say, heading into those last 3 rounds, I kind of felt like Frazer Clarke was probably going to win at that stage. But it was just such an epic battle. But it is the kind of one where you leave a big chunk of yourself in the ring. That will take some recovering from. You can't have too many of them, particularly at heavyweight, because they really do. I mean, it puts a dent in you.
I've seen some people suggest that the rematch could, or maybe even should, in terms of the money and the pay that the fighters are getting, happen over in Saudi. But with it being such a big fight on British soil, first time round, would you like to see it happen again if there is to be a rematch in the UK?
Yeah, I would, absolutely. Obviously, Fabio had his British title fight against David Adelaide over in Saudi Arabia, but I don't feel like British title fights need to be going to Saudi Arabia. I feel like when you look at that venture, and I've been at every fight night in this kind of new cycle of Saudi boxing. For me, it's like the Champions League, if you like, or international football. You've got your domestic competition and you need to keep that as strong as you can. But then it's no massive problem if the really biggest fights that struggle to get made, if they go to Saudi, because that's like the World Cup, if you like, or like I say, the Champions League. And they can take fights and make fights happen and force them through and get them done where anybody else might really struggle to get it done. That for me is a really good thing for boxing. That is a good thing for boxing. But I don't feel like we need to be taking British title fights, domestic level fights to Saudi Arabia. If you get offered it, you're going to take it, of course, because the money on offer will be better than you will get in the UK. And good luck to anyone who gets offered a fight over there, because why wouldn't you? It'd be absolutely ridiculous for anybody to suggest that a fighter shouldn't do it. But as I said right at the start, keeping the domestic scene solid and healthy is really important. So I would absolutely want to see that. I would absolutely want to see that here, because it would attract a lot of interest. I saw somebody talking yesterday about they could do it at Ipswich, and I know kind of over the last 10 years since stadium fights became a regular thing, which is incredible, really. Every time there's a big fight in the offing, the first thing is always, can we take it outdoors? But maybe you could. I mean, I don't know the level of support that Fabio's got in Ipswich. I know he has good support, but it's difficult to quantify, isn't it, as to how many people will actually come out. But if they could do that, that would be incredible. But if they can't, just go back to the O2. It's such a good arena.
earlier in the night. Dan Aziz joined you on commentary for the Ben Whittaker against Leon Willings matchup. Now, I know Dan, since taking that loss against Joshua Buatsu, he's been sort of keen to get his name and his face back out there. I think there was maybe some suggestion online, at least, that he would be pushed towards a matchup with Ben Whittaker. Did you get any sense of that?
From Dan, not especially. I didn't see him for long before we sat down. He kind of, because we were busy, obviously he kind of appeared, sat down. I had a quick chat with him about the role, really, because he hadn't done it before. I always do that just to make sure people are clear on what it is that we kind of need from them. It's all very sort of, it's not easy, that job, actually, but all I'm saying to them really is, it's just observations. Just chip in and give us whatever you've got whenever you've got it. And he's, obviously he was fine doing that. But you're there to kind of talk about the scene generally, and people had been talking about, how long would it be, for example, before, apologies for the background noise, it's my 5-month-old daughter who is doing a good job of staying quite quiet up until now, but we'll come on. Yeah, it had been talked about, hadn't it? You're always going to get that with somebody like Whittaker, because people are looking to push him really, really quick. And yes, there have been some fighters who've turned pro in recent years, over the last 10 years, who've gone really quick. But I think in some ways that's meant that people's expectations have become quite unrealistic, because just because Lomachenko boxed for a world title in his second fight and then won one in his third, and Usyk got one at 9-0, I think, and Bivol at maybe 11 or 12, that doesn't mean that you have to try and do that. And if you can't do it, then you've kind of failed. And that fight with Aziz, a European champion, talking about that when Whittaker's like 5 or 6-0, I understand it, but at the same time, I don't really feel like it's something that we should be trying to herd a fighter towards. And I think that Dan knows that too. I think he kind of understands that it's all a little bit of a game, boxing to an extent. But he had enough to say on the night, didn't he? Particularly towards the end, which was quite interesting. Just give me 1 second. I'm just going to see if I can. Okay, what have you done with this? Okay, here we go. Yeah. Okay. All good.
All good.
Yeah.
I think you alluded to it a little bit there. I think there were times during the commentary where Dan probably wasn't particularly impressed at times with what he was seeing from Ben Whittaker, maybe a little bit critical at times. Did you expect him to come out with that, and how did you feel about it?
I wasn't really sure what he'd say, to be honest with you. What you couldn't really see when he said, I think, I think he might have said at one point, no, it's actually a bit boring. I was expecting this and expecting that, was the look on his face, which was a mischievous look. Because I turned around to him and looked at him and just kind of, I didn't roll my eyes at him, but I just gave him a little kind of, I just looked at him basically. And that's how he was doing it. Whether that came across in his tone of voice or not, I don't really know, but that's how it was delivered. So he wasn't trashing Ben Whittaker. He wasn't saying, oh, this guy's, he's not what he's made out to be, this, that. Every fighter I know who has seen Ben Whittaker fight or encountered him at GB or at any level, they all agree on one thing, that he is a really good fighter. As for who he should be fighting next and all the rest of it, that's up to other people to decide, I guess. But he, that wasn't, when you look at the words on a page, often when they're taken out of any kind of context, lots of things seem really harsh. But if you had a camera on him at that point, and we did get a camera on him at the end of the fight, again, at the end of the fight, and that's a good example, it was mischievous, because I said it's like taking exams and you can't jump way through the levels. You get the odd genius who can, but they're extremely few and far between. If I'd expanded, I would have said like Lomachenko. And then Dan turned to me and said, so Andy, are you saying that Ben Whittaker's not a genius? And I think they cut away from us at that point. So I just said, Aziz, trying to get me into trouble. But that was the kind of mood he was in for the whole thing, basically. I think, he was invited to do it. He was happy to do it. He knows that it's a real thing that those two could box down the line. That absolutely could happen. I expect the chances of it happening are greater than it not happening, I would say. As for when exactly, who knows? So he knows that. So given that he knows that, he will be there to make a little bit of a point. So it's kind of, it's tongue in cheek and he's half joking, but he's also at points maybe just not really joking, or is he? It's one of those situations, really. You know what boxers are like. They're always looking ahead at who they might fight. And when it gets to the point where it becomes a reality or a potential reality, which I don't think it is for him yet, in his eyes, Dan, then they'll kind of their attitude will change. So, for example, when he was in the studio a few weeks ago, months ago, and Ben had a win, and he came and joined us in the studio, and he said, "You're just keeping those belts on hold for me." You know, he loved it. It was a bit of fun, because he doesn't really see that as something he's going to do at the moment. But as soon as we get to a point where he thinks to himself, okay, maybe you are ready for me now, and it's a big fight, yes, please, then there'll be none of that playing around anymore. You know, that'll all stop.
I would like to talk about a couple of days before fight night, the press conference. You and Ben Whittaker had a bit of a verbal altercation, if we could call it that. Probably puts it a little bit strongly, but he wasn't happy with some comments you'd previously made on commentary. Now, you stuck up for yourself. You made your points clear in that conversation. What was Ben's reaction? Did he say anything off camera afterwards at all, or?
No, I didn't see him again after that. Not kind of face to face. Obviously, you see him at the weigh-in, but there was no kind of. It wasn't like I saw him and he looked at me and I looked at him and nobody said anything. There was none of that, and I wasn't going to go and kind of try and have a conversation with him about it, because it just wouldn't be the right time. It's a day before the weigh-in and he's getting his head in that space. And honestly, I didn't really feel like we needed to do it, because I was fine with it. I've got no problem with any fighter coming to me about something I've said, because, you know, I make my living talking about what they do. So it would be absolutely absurd for me to be irritated if they then come and want to talk to me about what I do. That makes no logical sense, none whatsoever. So I kind of quite enjoyed it, to be honest with you, because conversations are good, you know, without wishing to get too deep and meaningful. So many problems could be avoided if people just talked about things and kind of got things out in the open. I didn't know that was going to happen. I had no idea that he watched his last fight back and didn't like what I said. I remember what I said, and I remember how I said it. We were kind of having a debate almost about interpretations of in-ring behavior, and, you know, is that disrespectful or is that just good fun? Or and when he tapped the opponent on the top of the head, I said, for me, that's disrespectful. And my interpretation of that purely is it's a rules thing. Showing off is not against the rules. So the extravagant movement, all of that stuff, that's not against the rules. But if you tap somebody on the top of the head, that's a foul, because you can't hit somebody with that part of the glove. It's the most harmless foul ever. And you're not trying to do your opponent any damage. You're not trying to steal some kind of unfair advantage, anything like that. But it is still a foul. And you've chosen to do it. And for me, choosing to break the rules of the ring, I think that's a bit disrespectful. But he disagreed with me, and that's fine. And he shook my hand at the end. Yeah, you know, I'm. If anything, I think kind of more of that, because it's interesting. It's interesting. You don't see it much. Footballers, I think they're told by clubs probably, you know, don't go, don't, you know, just don't say anything ever. Basically, I think is the party line for them most of the time. But boxing is an individual sport, and they're building up their personalities. And I don't see, why shouldn't they? Why shouldn't they? If they've got something they want to say to somebody, you know, why not?
I was going to say, in terms of building personalities, there aren't too many fighters out there that would have done what Ben Whittaker did at that press conference, in that interview. and it gauged a reaction. It got a reaction online, which isn't always a negative thing. And the profile he's building for himself, it just enhances that, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And I didn't really look at it much because I got home that day and I was on, as soon as I got in the door, like I was on duty. My wife just gave me our daughter, and that was me for the next kind of 3 or 4 hours. And then I did look at my phone and I thought, oh, interesting. I mean, I kind of knew that there would be a reaction to it. But for most of the kind of replies I did look at, and I did have a look for not for long. Some people, everybody wants everything to be about, oh, are you for it or are you against it now? And some people are saying, oh, Andy was right. Just as many people were saying Ben was right. But then quite a lot of people were just saying, look, this is just two people having a difference of opinion and getting it out there and talking about it. It's not that's all this is. And that's true. That's all it was. That is all it was. I will never take offense unless unless somebody gets unnecessarily personal and then they choose to go in a direction which has just got no relevance to what you're actually talking about. But people very, very rarely do that. And as I say, I thought he did it. I thought the way he did it, there's no way that I would ever have a problem with that, and nor should anybody, because that's just far too precious. That's just far too precious. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens from now on. But him and anybody else, they are more than welcome to talk to me about anything that I say, anything, and we can talk about it. That's the point. Yeah.
Something else we saw on Sunday night was Adam Azim's next opponent be confirmed, or at least they're in negotiations. I'm not sure if they've concluded quite yet. Adam Azim against Harlem Eubank. Do you see Harlem Eubank as an equal challenge, a stronger challenge than Dalton Smith, or in your mind is that a slightly easier fight for Adam?
Well, if you look at what they've done recently, Harlem Eubank and Dalton Smith, then you have to put Dalton Smith ahead of Harlem Eubank, and you have to put Dalton Smith ahead of Adam Azim as well, because Dalton Smith beat Sapida, and he did it in the style that he did it. Boxing metrics are not perfect, as we know. We don't have times and distances to compare or anything like that. Your yardsticks are who you've beaten, and often we'll try and compare people if they've got a recent common opponent. It's not an exact science, but the only way we can do it, Dalton Smith has to be ranked top of those three, doesn't he? Yeah. I mean, it's just logic. He does. That doesn't mean that he would definitely beat Adam Azim if they boxed. It doesn't mean that. We'll only find that out when they actually get it together. But the McGuigans will have been planning Adam Azim's journey 2 or 3 moves ahead for forever, basically. And they will have known that at some point a situation could loom where they get put together by a governing body, a sanctioning body, or whoever it is. But that isn't something that they can ever cater for in advance because it's too unpredictable. So their plan for him fighting Harlem Eubank, that would have been hatched. I don't know how long ago, but it would have been a while ago. And they're not going to necessarily change that trajectory that they've got planned just because other people have decided that that's what they should do. And it's a good fight for him. I've always liked Harlem Eubank, and I felt that he hasn't had the opportunities really that he's needed. I remember I commentated on him beating Sean Dodd, who was past his best at that point, but it was still a really good win, really good comprehensive knockout on the undercard. Denzel Bentley, Linus Adofia. And at that point, I think he felt like he would absolutely be in that British title mix. But then when Sam Maxwell vacated it, it was then Dalton Smith against Sam O'Maison. And I think Harlem at that point just thought to himself, hang on a second, I mean, what is going on here? Why am I not getting a look in? So I'm glad he's got, the opportunity. And it is a really good fight. It is a really good fight. But you couldn't say that on paper, Dalton Smith is a harder fight than Harlem Eubank because Dalton Smith has got a better resume than Harlem Eubank. That's just, like we say, that's just a fact, isn't it?
Is there any disappointment that we're not seeing Dalton Smith and Adam Azim next, from your opinion?
Oh, I mean, as a fan, as somebody who does my job and sits at ringside, I'd love to have seen it. Absolutely, it would have been. There would have been some entertaining back and forth with it being Matchroom and Boxer, and they would want it on DAZN, and Boxer would want it on Sky, and purse bids and all that kind of stuff. There would have been a lot to it. There would have been a lot going on around it, and it would have been great. It would have been great. I remember we had Dalton at the show late November 2022 when Adam Azim beat Ryland Charlton, and he did a bit of punditry. And at that point, it looked like he might be about to. But it's possible that he was going to sign with Boxer actually at that stage, but that didn't happen, obviously. And they're still running in parallel lines, and hopefully it will happen further down the line, maybe for a world title. I mean, that's always the ideal. But there are plenty of things that could go wrong in the meantime, as we've seen countless times. Be interested to see what Dalton does now. I'm not really sure who's next in line for that, actually, for that European title. I'd imagine that he will want to win it, but you could argue that having beaten Zepeda, that whoever he boxes for the European title will be kind of a step backwards from him.
Yeah. Well, we'll round this off with a little bit of heavyweight talk, starting with Tyson Fury. Over the last couple of weeks, there's been a few training clips out there of Tyson looking in really good shape, as he should be, for the undisputed fight with Alexander Usyk. As we've sort of neared that matchup, how have your opinions, if they have at all, changed with how that's going to go?
I mean, they have changed a bit over the course of the last 6 months, because it was a poor performance from Fury against Ngannou. We all know that. And that did make me wonder whether he could be on the wane slightly, because he's been at this a long time. And 2 of those 3 fights against Wilder were really, really hard. And he's not really been tested since the 3rd fight, because he beat Dillian Whyte and Derek Chisora pretty comfortably. And then I think he really did think he was going to beat Ngannou pretty comfortably, and it turned into a tricky night for him in the end. So at that point, I was kind of thinking to myself, if he is going down the other side of the hill, then obviously that narrows the gap between him and Usyk, because I've always felt that that Fury, I would install him as a pretty solid favourite, because he's skillful enough to make the size difference count. And that's what it's always been for me. It's just as simple as that. He's skillful enough to make his size difference count. So I'd say that the gap has probably, in my own mind, has probably narrowed a little bit. I do think it's going to be a very, very close fight, though. I don't really see Fury knocking Usyk out. I mean, I changed my mind when I kind of think about it. Not every week or anything, but I do think about it a lot, and I do find myself changing my mind sometimes. But I do think it's a distance fight. I do think it's a distance fight, and given how good and how clever Usyk is, I can't see how that's going to be anything other than pretty close. I mean, you can have a clear winner in a close fight. We know that. Usyk AJ2, for example, clear winner in a close fight. I thought.
Yeah.
But I do think that what he did against Ngannou, Fury, which is basically take his eye off the ball, that doesn't mean you haven't trained. It just means you haven't trained with the intensity that you would train with if you're in against someone who puts the wind up you, gives you that fear that you could lose. And he'll definitely have that against Usyk. So therefore, training will have just been a completely different thing this time around, completely different. It could be for Usyk that Macklin was saying this, actually, Macklin, that what happened against Ngannou was the worst possible thing for Usyk, because it'll mean that he will 100% get a completely on-point Fury. And that's all we want. All we want in May is for both fighters to turn up in absolutely top shape, having had a great camp, with nothing that they could point to. Not that they would, they're not those kinds of characters, but with everything just where it should be, as it should be. Let's do it. May the best man win.
And finally, rounding it off, I can see someone's getting a little impatient. Anthony Joshua and his options at the moment. It seems, although that vacant or will be vacant IBF title may be going to Filip Hrgović and Daniel Dubois, that leaves a little bit of a gap for Anthony Joshua as far as his plans go. What do you think we should see from Anthony Joshua? Is it a good idea for him to wait around and see what happens with Fury and Usyk, or should he be staying active at the moment?
Sorry, I just missed that very last bit. Is it a good idea for him to wait around, did you say?
Do you think it would be sensible to wait around and see what happens in Fury Usyk, or staying active?
I think he'll want to stay active because that's what has brought him this rich vein of form that he's in now, is basically being active. And it's the same for Joseph Parker. Everybody should look at those two guys and just think it's not rocket science. There's an underlying theme there. But it's tricky, isn't it? Because there is a two-way rematch clause with Fury Usyk. But then some people suggest, but if Fury wins, the Saudis will want to make Fury AJ straight away, which would make complete sense. And you would imagine they have the firepower to do that in terms of talking to Usyk and saying to him, listen, you will 100% get the winner. Here's a nice compensation package for stepping aside. But he might not want to do that because he might think, well, but if Fury beats AJ, he might then retire and I'll never get the chance to level the score. Boxing's very unpredictable, as we know. So that situation might not be very straightforward. Usyk obviously could beat Fury. The Dubois Hrgović thing has come as a bit of a surprise to me because I just expected that the way that Joshua would keep busy if they did rematch Fury and Usyk would be to box for that IBF title. Mm-hmm. So that's come as a bit of a surprise to me. If that's not going to happen and he needs another fight to keep him active, then people would probably try and put him and Parker together as the two form guys because Parker's WBO interim. And if there is the rematch, the IBF will take their belt out, but the WBO could as well. You never know, in which case their kind of history, their form would suggest that they would promote their interim champion to full champion. And then Joshua would be fighting Parker for essentially for the WBO title. So it'd be something like that, maybe a rematch between those two. And I wouldn't be against that, but he does find himself in a potentially a slightly difficult situation, Anthony.
You're good. We'll end it there because I'm seeing you've got some important things to get on with. I know you're a busy man at the moment, and there's plenty on your schedule. What have you got coming up, Andy?
So I just selfishly flashed a picture of the book in front of the camera there. So this month mainly, I'm kind of pushing that. So I've written this book called The Knockout: Sport's Most Decisive Moment, which is basically about the knockout. I really enjoyed doing it. I do think it's something that people will really enjoy reading it. I hope they do anyway, because I got great contributions. I'm not saying that's because I'm the world's greatest writer. I got great contributions from people talking about what it's like to knock somebody out, what it's like to get knocked out. How do you move on from it? Fear and nerves play a big part in it. The boxer's mentality is a big part of it. How do you commit to that life, basically, where it's chin or be chinned? So that's what I'm mainly doing this month. And the guys who kind of feature in it, mostly are Tony Bellew, Carl Froch, Amir Khan, Ricky Hatton, David Hay did a great little piece with me, and loads of other people as well. So I'm you'll see me out and about pushing that over the next few weeks. It's out at the end of May the 31st. And then May's really busy. It's Cardiff with Lauren Price, and then off the back of that, straight off to Saudi Arabia, then Poland with Lawrence Okoli. And then I think I'll be back out to Saudi for the 5 versus 5. Better BF Bivol undercard. So yeah, plenty of things to occupy my time, as you can hear in the background.
I really appreciate it, Andy, and I'll imagine I'll see you in Cardiff in around a month's time.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Josh.